Welcome to Fertility for the podcast. If you are coming back to us, welcome back. And if you are new to our space, well, you are always welcome here. All journeys are always welcome at Fertility Fair. We have a really insightful episode today with our guest, Lana Manikowski. She is an author, certified life coach, keynote speaker, and infertility advocate. And as she will tell you in our episode, also activist and pioneer in the space of finding life fulfillment and purpose after infertility and being child free and childless, not by choice. After a 7-year IVF journey ended without a child and donor eggs and adoption just weren't for her, she felt lonely, self judgment, and grief of trying to navigate what the future looked like now without a child. And when she couldn't find the support that she was looking for and also needed it, she created it. Her coaching practice, her podcast, and her annual Others Day brunch, which she will dive into on our episode, is all here to provide an uplifting space for women to feel seen, understood, and equipped to thrive after infertility. This journey does not define you. And she will also get into what a purpose filled life looks like and looking at how to define life after, jumping out of infertility and the treatment cycle. So she also has a book coming out in April, which she will also dive into on our episode, that offers a transformative roadmap for creating a fulfilling life without the children you dreamed of, and has inspired women worldwide to embrace their next chapter with clarity and confidence. So we are in for a treat with Lana on this episode. So are you ready to jump in? Let's do it. We are back for another episode of Fertility Ain't Fair, and I am already going to give you flowers and thank you so much, Lana, for hopping into our space. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you?
I am so good. I'm so glad to connect with you. And when you reached out, I was like, I don't know, my heart skipped a beat because anytime I find another sister going through infertility who knows what it's like and has been what it's like, it just makes my heart soar. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I felt that way when I came across your profile as well. And I went to like your quick, what you're doing, what's going on, who is she? I need to know her. And I also felt like a kindred spirit when I saw your bio. We'll get into all of those things in our podcast. But when I saw that you went through 7 years in this community and, with IUI and IVF, and now you have found a way to transition out of the craziness and into a place of living and thriving and helping others. I was just like, I felt connected. And who knows what's going to happen in our journey, right? We're still on it. As I was telling you off camera, we're still in it, 7+ I could say now years, but we never know how it's going to end, right? So I think what has been, I was telling another infertility sister a week ago in a support group that I felt like in the last year, for me, it has been really helpful to see multiple sides of what success looks like in this space. And it does not equal what we all thought it would equal, because that's not what everyone's path is going to end. It does not always end with a live child. And so it has been comforting for me to see, hey, someone like you who did it, who said, I am stepping out, I am tapping out, I have done it, I have reached my point, and I'm going to thrive and find purpose and fulfillment on the other side. And it's not motherhood. And that's okay. And to see that version of success and fulfillment is really important. So thank you again for answering a random girl's DMs.
Always. Like I will do whatever I can to support always.
Appreciate it. Well, let's jump in. I know we have a lot to go over as always. So let's start at the top, as we do with all of our guests in our space, and ask you a simple but not simple question. I'm sure for you it's changed over the years, like many of us, but how do you currently define yourself? Like words, phrases, what would you say to us to get to know you a little bit better?
Yeah, well, I sometimes will call myself an infertility advocate, but somebody actually corrected me and they said, I see you as an activist. So I like to now embrace that as part of who I am, somebody who tries to impart awareness, but also change. I think that there's a lot that we as infertile women, and especially those of us going through fertility treatments, we often feel like we don't have a voice in things. And one of the things that I like to do is create that voice for people who maybe aren't at a place where they're ready to share it with others. Also, I think it's really important to see myself as a pioneer in life after infertility. You often find a lot of support when you're going through it. And for me, when I left my treatment, I didn't really see anyone standing out to me that had a life that I felt aspiring to live. So I would say a pioneer in life after infertility. And then in general, just a God loving, people loving person who just really is trying to carve her way every day, even though my life turned out so differently than I thought it was going to be.
I love all of those things. And I think to your point about the advocate versus activist, I love that minor tweak, if you will, because the words are different, they have different meanings. And so I love that you are embracing that someone told you that, because you are, and you are a pioneer. As we mentioned again off camera, it's really hard to, I think, when you get into the space, of course, you're looking for success in the way of a child. When you're thrown in here because no one asked to be here, no one raised their hand to be, a part of the infertility community. And so, you're grasping at straws, trying to find those who have done it and have brought a child home. Because when you enter it, obviously you're entering in, and that's what you want, right? That's what you want. It's what you desired for how many years. And so I think it's important to, again, find people who are able to show you that there's so many different ways to tackle this. And again, find your purpose outside of what we thought it was going to look like, and outside of what we kind of see a lot of. I don't mean that in a way that we don't need to see success stories when it comes to, bringing children home, but I think we have to find more avenues, right? Because that is not going to be everyone's journey and everyone's end. And so thank you for doing the work that you're doing as a pioneer. I also love that. And we're going to get into your coaching and your book and all of that. But let's start kind of at the top. And how did you find yourself in the worst group best member club,
Mm.
and being active for 7 years? Tell us about your journey. I know we could probably be here all day discuss it, but high level, kind of what was that journey like for you, and what all did you do to try to get that child home originally?
Yeah. Well, for me, I was always very success driven, focused on my career, advancement in the workplace, living the big city life. I live in Chicago. So, out and about all the time, doing all the social things. And so marriage and children were something that I wanted, to have in my life, but it wasn't something that I left college and I was like ready to settle down. So I got married when I was 35. And it wasn't until I was 37 that I even went for workup. I think, I'd always had regular cycles, and I just had this idea like, well, when I'm ready, like, I'll just get pregnant. And it was when I was 37, I was on the phone. I remember I was in the grocery store in the cracker aisle. I just remember that always, talking to a girlfriend of mine who had both her children through IVF. And she said, "Are you and Jack, thinking about having kids?" And I was like, "Yeah, we've been trying." She's like, "Well, I had trouble. I'm just sharing this with you, but, you might want to think about getting workup." And I was like, "Oh, you think?" Like, it was just, in hindsight, I can't believe how clueless I was, that at 37 that I hadn't even thought about going for workup. But I did, and I got diagnosed with unexplained infertility. And luckily I live, in a big city, so we had access to fertility centers close by and multiple, different clinics that I was able to choose from. So I ended up going through the university, and I had maybe 7 IUIs, I want to say, at the end of things, because we just always thought, oh, this will work next time. And my husband wanted it to be a bit more, and I'm going to put in air quotes, natural. And he was like, well, maybe, this will just happen on its own and it'll feel more like a natural creation. And then when that didn't pan out in any pregnancies at all, we then moved on to IVF. And I had 3 rounds of IVF here in Chicago, one that was a fresh transfer that didn't take. And then after that 3rd round of going through a retrieval process and then having nothing. The transfer I did have was for my 1st round. We got to the 2nd round, nothing survived after day 5. 3rd round, nothing survived. And then I was kind of like, I don't know, like, I'm just going to chill from here. And I gave it a rest and I wasn't sure. I sat in limbo for about a year and a half, just trying to decide, do I do this again? Is it going to work? At this point, I'm already in my 40s. But I just really wasn't sure that I could feel fulfilled as a woman without a child. And one of my other girlfriends, we all have these friends who go through fertility, right? And she decided to go to a clinic out in Colorado. And she really encouraged me. She's like, try it again. It's a different vibe. I'd monitor here in Chicago and then I'd fly out there when it got closer to my retrievals. And she's like, you're much more relaxed because you're, rushing through your day-to-day stuff with work and all that. So I gave that a try. We did another 3 rounds there. I had one frozen embryo from my first round there, and we ended up thawing it at the end. That was the only one we ever had banked, and it ended up having trisomy 16. And that was where the journey ended. At the end of that, my doctor, my reproductive endocrinologist was like, your response rates are very low. Like, I would be happy to do another one for you, but just from a clinical aspect, I just don't think it's going to result any differently. So he kind of gave me the option, and I just decided, maybe this is it. Maybe it's time I just swallow, the idea of being a mom. And I didn't know where to start and where to figure it out, but I figured, it was enough. So that was the end of my journey. And I was given the option of egg donor and adoption. And the last conversation I had with my doctor was, here are some options. Think about it. You don't have to make a decision today. I know it's a big decision, but let us know what you decide. And I didn't feel like I had any reason to call back. So that was it.
First, thank you for sharing, because I know it's a lot. And it was, I think you said your last, was kind of 2017. So, it's a lot to bring back to the forefront. And you decided at that point, I know people are always so quick to say, well, have you thought about adoption and surrogacy? And they do it so casually because they've never had to experience that. And the decision to make to, again, like you said, say I'm literally done, I'm walking away from this journey, this process, or to move forward is so deeply personal. And it's not for everybody. And, adoption is for everybody. Surrogacy isn't for everybody. It could be for any reason, right? It could be financial. It could just be in your heart. It's not for you. But thank you for sharing the journey and your decision to say, I am done with this hamster wheel. I think as you put on one of your social media posts that I saw, because it really explained what it feels like. How did you and your husband grieve just the process of closing this chapter? Because again, we're going to get to the thriving part, but I'm sure it was not an overnight thing where you're like, oh, I'm done and I feel great and we're going to live and do wonderful things. And I'm sure it wasn't an overnight process. So
it was not.
Acknowledge and grieve or start to grieve that process. And maybe you still are, because I don't feel like it ever really goes away necessarily, but you learn to move through. But how did you start that process?
I didn't really know that I was entitled to grieve. It's a really weird place to be because I never had a positive pregnancy test at all. Like, I was never once pregnant. So I felt like I wasn't really given the permission to see myself as someone who could grieve only a dream. But, this dream was so vivid of being a mom that I felt like I had lost this life that I always dreamed of. Instead of figuring out a way to deal with it, sadly, there were no resources offered to me. I remember once asking my person I went to acupuncture for my, when I was going through cycles, I remember asking her for a name of a therapist, but I ended up not calling her because she hadn't gone through fertility treatment. So I kind of felt like I didn't really have anyone who I could relate to seek mental health assistance. So I just did it on my own. And I don't think I did a great job of it. What I did was put this big armor on in front of everyone around me that I was okay. I felt like I couldn't let them see how broken I was because they would see me as weak. And I already felt so weak inside from all the loss that I had gone through those 7 years. And when I say loss, again, not a pregnancy loss, but just the loss of knowing who I was and who I was going to be. So I felt like I really put this like fake facade on that I was okay. And I remember feeling exhausted when I'd come home from work events or social events or church events where I knew people were probably wondering what was going on, why my husband and I weren't having kids yet. I didn't A lot of people didn't know I went through fertility treatments. So that would add a lot of like, oh, do people think we're having marital problems, that we're not popping out kids yet? Do they think that I'm a selfish, goal-oriented, social and corporate climber, and my job is more important than having kids? So all these things would pop through my mind. So I would just thought if I would just show up looking like a stoic, well-dressed, put together woman, everyone would be like, oh, she's got this great life. Like maybe she's okay without kids. And I come home and I remember just feeling so exhausted because it was so opposite of what I was feeling inside. So I didn't really have a lot of management of how to even navigate this grief. And we might want to touch on this later, but it's what motivated me last year. I did an advanced coaching certification in grief and post-traumatic growth because I see that there's so many women who don't have the resources to manage their grief after fertility treatments don't end up in a living child. So for me, it was the pandemic when life finally slowed down, when my work, was work from home and I had all this time in front of me and I didn't have work to escape to and social events to escape to, that I realized I didn't really know who I was. And that's when I discovered life coaching. And I started working with a life coach more about my weight gain, that I, had gained a lot of weight during my fertility treatments. And turned out she was a life coach. And that exposed me to some of the methodologies of life coaching, which I had no clue about. And then I decided during the pandemic, I was going to go become a certified life coach for women like me who didn't know how to move forward without the children they always dreamed of.
Thank you for doing that. I'm always amazed because I've spoken to several women over the course of these 4 seasons of the podcast, and more than not, this journey has taken them in ways that have become a business or coaching, or it could be a jewelry company, it could be a resource group, it could be a side hustle. And it's taken us here because, like you said, to fill a gap, because everyone's journey, while we might have similarities and there's commonalities, is very, very different. There's so many unique plot twists for each of us in this journey. And so I am just always not shocked, but amazed and just in awe of so many women who are choosing to literally take the lemons and make lemonade by filling a gap in the space. And usually it's because, like you said, I didn't do a great job because I didn't have any resources. I didn't know what to do, where to go, and there was no one that I could find like me who could help me. So I had to be the change. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for, taking up the gauntlet of there are more women out there like me, and I need to turn this into purpose work. Because it's so important. And so I'm glad that you transitioned into that space and that you did the work that you needed to do, but also you said, I'm going to help somebody else. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned making the transition and showing up, because we all know how to show up and put on the happy face and walk away and crumble, because that's what we do a lot of, well, because we don't have a choice a lot of times. I saw something on your social media page, and it talked about like motherhood has always been portrayed to us in society as like the ultimate fulfillment, right? We've been taught that motherhood equals purpose. And so I know you've mentioned a little bit about this, but what are some of the ways that you have, I guess, intentionally like redefined purpose and fulfillment for yourself and for your life? Because when I read that, it just struck a nerve. And I want to be clear that we're not bashing motherhood here. We're not bashing people with children. We're not, here to, throw rage around, but I think to that point, like there are people who really do feel like this is the ultimate level of purpose. And, without my kids, I'd be nothing. And that is your truth and in where you stand. But I also think, to your point of society making that so normal, that it's a burden for those of us in some ways that don't have that, especially when we wanted that. And so I thought that was really, really important to bring up, because I feel like I know we're not alone when we say like there is more to life than this, and again, it's not a knock at whoever feels differently about it, but people will say, oh, you won't know love until you have children. well, how is that possible? So I don't have the love, or I don't know what unconditional love feels like since I have children. That never sits well with me, right? So I think it's kind of same in the same light. So how have you been able to take that and spin it so that it's much more of an inclusive space, that you don't have to have children to have purpose and fulfillment?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I think I have a much different focus on purpose. I wish I could remember what podcast episode it was on my podcast that I recorded about this. But for me, I think a lot of us feel like you have to declare your purpose and put this rubber stamp on, my name is Lana and my purpose is da 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 da. And I find it to be a much different thing. So what I've found throughout my evolution of learning that I wasn't going to become a mom, I of course felt this like same things that you said. People are going to think that I just don't know how to feel love, that I have always this missing piece in my life that, I was always looked at as the worst case scenario of how my life ended up because I didn't have children. And I came to learn, as just thinking about how my processed and ended up, that my purpose that I live every day isn't really defined by me. And the way that I see it, this is, kind of different than most people see it, is how I show up in the world and how I live my life in this version of me that feels so much more free in being loving and acknowledging of people whose lives have turned out differently than mine, and feeling fueled by the things that I do every day in my life and my relationships and my friendships with my family. I show up as a different person. If you ask my mom what purpose I have in her life versus what purpose I serve in the life of my niece or someone in my workplace, everyone's going to find a different purpose that they would define how I show up. So it started getting me to think about, like, maybe we spend a lot of time trying to define our purpose through something, but if you show up being connected to yourself as a human, you serve so many multiple purposes in this world that aren't even really defined by you. So I think of like my second grade teacher. I'm sure she was a mom. I don't really remember, but she taught me arithmetic, the 2 + 2s, and I remember putting the stickers on the walls when I got to on my times tables and all that stuff. And that was like the purpose she served in my life. And so I'll remember her for those things. And I think we as individuals can let go of some of that stress that we have to declare our purpose only as one sole thing, whether it's motherhood or number one sales rep or whatever case it is, and just rest easy and just be who you are, and people will take from you what you are giving them that they need. So does that make sense to you? Or, it's a very different way of seeing purpose that I think takes a lot of stress off you as an individual.
It makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking about how that plays out in my own life and how it can play out my own life. Because again, to your point, I think, breaking societal norms and breaking, like I said, these things these titles, right, that become just so heavy on us. And then if things do not work out in the way that would, kind of define these titles, then you're kind of left like how you have your podcast. So now what? And to your point, if we just release ourselves from these things and just see how life plays out and do our thing, do our things to the best of our ability, is that we already serve so many different areas of life. You said this, we show up differently in all our spaces. So we already have multiple spaces that we're showing up in. And I think we're just choosing, again, based on norms, to attach titles that make things easier to tell people who we are. But when you release those things, and I think this is part of, what you're saying and what your journey is, that I've had to release those things because they did not turn out that way. And that's helpful. It's
Yeah, as
comforting.
long as you play into the stereotypes that people have created for we as women, whether it's, through race, gender, whatever it might be, as long as you accept that as your truth, then you're always going to feel like you're missing out.
Yeah.
And when you just define what you want to believe to be true about you and how you stand in this world, then the rest just falls into place, and you don't have to worry about whether that's how Joni gets her purpose through her kids, which God bless her, she has that ability, but that's not my reality. So I'm done thinking that that's the only way I could have ever found purpose and love.
I love it. It makes sense. And I hope everyone took that in their notes. If not, rewind, go back and find a different way to look at purpose and
Mhm.
redefining or defining, who you are and what you're doing in this world. So thank you for sharing that. So let's jump into your coaching side of the world and business and thriving after infertility. So when did you know, like when was the moment when you were like, okay, I think you mentioned a little bit, but take us back again. Like what was that aha, that light bulb moment, like, yep, I'm gonna go into coaching and I am gonna help others get through this because I didn't have a coach to do this. So when was that moment for you and how has it been and in this space of coaching others?
Yeah, well, it was when through the coach I was working with, asked me to tell my story and, tell me about you. And she listened intently and she's like, how does it feel when you tell your story? And I thought, gosh, it sounded like so sad. It sounded really disempowering. It sounded very much like not the person that I always knew myself to be. She presented me with the opportunity to decide that I could retell my story and I could decide what my story without changing what I had been through, but the way that I tell my story about myself. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is like, it gives me chills right now when I'm thinking about it, like just how powerful it felt to think that I could have gone through all that I went through, but the way that I presented myself and my story didn't always have to feel like I was the one who lost out and the one who was missing out on the life that she wanted. So that was when I just like, I got to do this. Like women who ended up like me, women who even are going through fertility treatments and at a crossroads and they're afraid to stay. Like I'm done because they don't know how they'll end up, so they can keep going for that next round. And they put themselves through more and more because they're afraid that they're going to end up with this sad story of a life that's like just so disconnected from who they are as a woman. So that was really what motivated me to sign up for my life coaching program. It was a 1-year program and it was a lot of money. I remember going to my husband and I wanted to make that decision together and just, make sure he was on board with it as well. And I remember I was like crying and I was like, honey, I got to talk to you. And he was like, what? I was like, I want to be a life coach. I remember crying, like I could hardly get my words out. I was like, I want to be a life coach for women who are childless after infertility. And he gave me the biggest hug. And he's like, I think that's such a great idea. And that was when I signed up for the program. And it was like $21,000. It was like not cheap. So, it was a big investment. And the minute I said that I was going to do it, I knew that I was doing it for the right reasons. I knew that I was helping women hear a story that they hadn't heard or create a story that they hadn't thought about or heard for themselves. And maybe if I was the first one to show it to them, I could change one life and, maybe through that magnify to thousands and hopefully millions one day.
I just want to give a quick shout out to all the supportive partners
Yeah.
because and I know we can touch on it briefly now, but um, I think it's phenomenal that again that you were like, hey, this is what I want to do, and he was like, awesome, and I got your back all the way. Let's do it. Because it is like if you have a partner on the journey, right? It could either truly be a benefit, and for others, it breaks them down, right? Like we've talked about in other episodes and with other people, people have not been able to get through this together. It's
Mhm.
been too much. And, for whatever reasons, whether this was a sole reason or not, they have separated or divorced or whatever, or it's really strained relationships, marriages, etc. So on that note, really quickly, how have you all together been able to I guess transition and like what are some of the ways that you've been able to just I don't want to say keep things alive. I don't want to sound like that, but how have you guys been as one who was married and we always got to figure out how to get through this together. How have you guys been able? What advice would you give to couples who are dealing with this with their infertility and going through it and how to I guess maintain the relationship while going through so much.
Well, it's one of the pillars of my coaching program is relationships, because it is such a profound thing. We dealt with the kind of process of life after infertility much differently. My husband still, like, to this day, doesn't really talk about it much, where I'm, an open book and, chit chatting with everyone now that I'm at this, side of things. But there was a time when we first ended our journey. I remember thinking, like, is this going to be enough? Like, is the two of us together as individuals going to be enough without kids to keep things bonded and exciting and new experiences? And I remember sitting at the dinner table and we'd talk about our days, and I felt like, God, this is like such mundane conversation. Like, is this going to like keep us going? So for the work that, I do and I teach with my clients and Thrive After Infertility, is really understanding, like, what are your individual goals, and understanding that you two are two different people. And I think it's really important that you have your independence, but also together as a couple. Like, what are your goals as a couple, and what do you want to do more of? On our anniversary, where it's always like, not what went wrong, what we didn't do, but like, what do we want to focus on doing more of as a couple? What's important to us as individuals, so that we can lift each other up in our own personal goals and career goals, or whatever the case is. I think a lot of it is just being open and talking about what is it that you're aspiring to have as individuals and as a couple.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think also I saw you talked about, creating the milestones because, with your, again, as individuals and probably also as a couple or in any of your relationships that are in your life. And I think it's really important that you mentioned that because like you said, in the post, it was like, you have children, there's kind of built-in milestones, right?
Mhm.
And so those things are just going to, prayerfully happen, as things progress. And so, how do you then, removing those built-in milestones, how do you create the ones for yourself that are going to excite you and fulfill you and have you I'm also, very kind of type A-ish, and I like to check things off a list. I like to have the check down, so and I get a rush, right, from completing things, small and large. And so, thank you for sharing advice because I think it is also important. Well, I talk to obviously majority females on the podcast and in life with this are males going through infertility, and there's also a lot of couples obviously going through infertility, so together. And so I think it's always important to just kind of add that in there because I feel like there's not always a lot of support for the unit because you are going through it differently. You're together, but you're going through it differently. So thank you for adding that. I saw something as you mentioned your pioneer title. So what is the Others Day Brunch? Because I
Mm.
saw it and I was like, I think I might know what this is because the title is cute and I think I get it. I get the joke. But what is this? And tell us more about what you have started with this brunch.
Yeah, so this started back in 2022. So I remember I was shopping at Target and they had all the Mother's Day banners. It was April. Yeah, I want to say it was like mid-April. And yeah, I have a sister who has children and a mom who's in my life. And I feel really grateful on Mother's Day that I'm able to celebrate with them. But there's still that tinge, even this far along in my journey, that I'm like, no, I'll never have that Mother's Day card made by a kid or breakfast in bed with, I envision like these like commercials you see where the kids are bringing the tray into bed to mom. And I felt like, gosh, if I'm feeling this disconnection, I bet you that there's other women who probably feel this way. So I started a meetup group. It's for women who are child free and childless. That afternoon, I remember I came home and I was like, I'm going to host a brunch and see if there's anyone who feels that same way that wants to come. So I started this meetup group. I rented this event space in the apartment building I was living in, and I had 18 women show up, and I did it the day before Mother's Day. And it was such a beautiful experience. No one knew each other. There was a couple people I knew from work that were childless that came, but the other guests, no one really had a connection to anyone there. People were exchanging Instagram handles and emails, and it was very, sorry, my dog was jumping off me. It was very just such a connective experience. So I decided to do it again in 23, and then I got national news coverage again in 24. I was on the national primetime news talking about the Other's Day brunch. And this year it's going to be on May 10th here in Chicago. People fly in from out of town. People have come from Puerto Rico, Texas, Florida, all over. And it's just such a beautiful experience for women to come and feel as though they're connected to other women without having to tell their story. It's not doom and gloom. It is a very positive, like women come in there like excited to talk and meet new people. And it's really grown in the fact that women, I think, are looking for an opportunity to celebrate themselves, but haven't found the place to actually do it. So that's what the Other's Day brunch is all about. And I'd love for you to come. Women come that are still in the midst of treatment. People, I know a woman, she came the last 2 years and she sent me an email that she just had her first baby. And, it's a really beautiful space. So I started that just to create unity for other women that were maybe feeling the same way I was when they were walking down the aisles of Target right before Mother's Day.
Yes. Oh my God. I love it. I love it. Again, pioneering work to do that. It was so smart. And to your point, like there's, regardless of what happens, that twinge that you mentioned when the commercials start going and all of that. I also have a sister who has lots of boys and, cousin who has, kids and of course friends, and my mom is still alive. So again, to your point, I have had to prepare myself every year going into that weekend. And every year has been different. Some years I have been angry. There have been other years where I've just been immensely sad. And the last couple years, I have tried to be really intentional about, to your point, being grateful for like still having my mom here and, recognizing that people are doing Mother's Day, all different ways. That has allowed me to, I think, approach in the last probably 2 years, approach it, with a sense of peace, but it's never, just a day, it's a lot to prepare myself for. And I think was it last year? I want to say it was last year. I had saw someone talking about, creating a text message to send out to close family and friends in preparation of that day. And, everyone's text was different, but I liked having the language to say, while we are celebrating mothers of all kinds, also be where people are dealing with this. And, again, you could ask for space, or you could ask for, privacy, or ask for support, or whatever it is. But I think I did it. I saw it, I think 2 years ago. I was like, oh, wow, I love having that verbiage to put out into my world. But at that point, I was like, but do I feel comfortable doing that? Do I want to rail that parade and stuff, or whatever, do I want to put that out there? But I did it last year. And I felt so good and got so many responses that were just positive. And I think I shared it on social media as well, to say, hey, if you needed the permission to feel empowered to send out language to your community on this day, do it. But I absolutely love that. I will definitely look for it. And if I could make it up there, I was actually born outside Chicago, and mission, I have not been back ever.
Where were you from?
I was born in Elmhurst, and I've never been back. It's insane. So I need more reasons to come and enjoy the city. So as we try to wrap up, a couple things. One, you have a book coming out in April. Go girl. That is my birthday month, so I'm partial to April.
Okay.
But tell us about So Now What, which is also your podcast, but tell us about your book and give us a sneak peek on, I guess, what the community should expect from this new book.
Yeah, so it's nice because it's not necessarily about me. Like there's parts of my story that are woven in, but it's more so about how to manage things like, there's a chapter on Mother's Day, there's a chapter on Christmas, there's chapters on Halloween, these types of things, but also how to handle the baby shower invites, what to do when your best friend's got their kid's first birthday and you just don't have the words or the energy to show up. So it's about, I want to say, ending up to be about 180 some pages. So it's a nice sized book. It talks about the realities of living a life that turned out so differently than you dreamed of. It's focused on women who either went through IVF and left without a child, or women who ended up childless by circumstance or not by choice. So it's really, I think you don't have to have just gone through IVF to get something out of it, which is nice. And it's an opportunity for women. There's exercises of, some writing prompts, some journaling, things that women can take out of each chapter and really start to noodle through some of the concepts that I teach. And of course, it doesn't go as deep as I'm able to do. We worked in person in my Thrive After Infertility Mastermind, but it really gives women a good foundation to start to work through some of those common struggles that you have when your life turned out without the children you always dreamed of. So
That is
yep.
exciting. Are you excited?
Oh, I'm so excited. Yes, I'm nervous because I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like, who am I to write a book? Will anyone buy it? But
But
I know it's just, your brain kind of like, who's this little girl born in Indiana? She is. What is she doing? So I
what do you mean? Like this, I'm so excited for you.
yes.
I see the excitement just in your face. I know it's of course it is nerves and all these different emotions to put it on display out to the world. I mean, to have a printed book is a really, really big deal.
Yeah. And the
But
cover is gorgeous. The cover, what I love about it, I haven't put the final cover out for the public to see yet, but there's a lot of interpretation you can take from the artwork. And the people that I have run it past, like everyone sees something different when they look at the image on the cover. And I love that about the book because I think it talks to how so many of us, even though our path was similar, we've experienced different things. So when the cover comes out, I'll be excited for people to share what they see. And I showed it to my uncle the other day who, he saw something totally different. Of course, he's a guy, right?
I love
And
it.
he never went through infertility. So, I love that there's different interpretations that could be taken from the cover. So I'll be excited to share that with the world too.
Very excited. Well, we'll be supporting and cheering and buying. That is super exciting. And again, so many different ways that people are taking what they've gone through and creating the resources that are not there. So I'm excited to get my hands on it as well. And so what is one thing that you dropped a lot of information, which has been
Mhm.
fantastic, but one thing to leave with our community and then tell them how they can find you and connect with you on the internet.
On the World Wide Web. Oh, I think for me is just really going back to that owning your story. And one of the things I think a lot of women are blindsided by are, the comments or the questions, especially, when you're not prepared how to answer them and how to authentically interact with somebody without telling them your whole story. So I think understanding how you want to respond when somebody asks, do you have kids? Or why don't you have kids yet? Or they tell you you should pray on it or be patient, all these things that we've already been doing. So for that, I created a free guide that people can download. It's called The 27 Things People Say When You're Childless and How to Respond. So I think it's really important for women to have ownership of their responses and their story. You can download that on my website, which is lanamanikowski.com. And I think that's really part of owning our story and owning who we are and how we want to portray ourselves as women who are infertile.
Lana, thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough for again just being in this space, taking up the action to again be a pioneer, be the one that people need to see, and spreading your journey, your story, and what you have learned on the process with so many people who are going to need this, who have probably needed it for so many years and had literally nowhere to turn. And then hopefully, as we mentioned, our work is the hope is that someone else will not feel alone in whichever way their story goes. So thank you for allowing us to feel seen and feel heard and valued along along the journey. So congratulations to all that you have been doing, what you have coming up, and I'm sure we'll all be following for what's next in Lana's world. So thank you for joining Fertility Ain't Fair. So that wraps up this episode of Fertility Ain't Fair, the podcast. Again, Lana, thank you so much for joining us, for being a part of our community and another resource for you out there. If you are someone who is maybe at a crossroads with your infertility journey and you don't feel like, you have the support to say, I'm done. I want to move forward. I want to get off the hamster wheel, as we mentioned in the episode. This is your support episode. This is one more person to add to your journey that can help you through it, help you go through the grief and the transition. And as she mentioned, having that resource of what do I say? How do I answer questions that I'm either not prepared for or that I don't really want to have to answer? Where do I turn? Lana has been there. She has gone through it, and she is here to help us through her coaching business, through her podcast, and also through her book, which is coming out in April. So now what? So if you want to connect with her, please do so on her Instagram, on her website. Reach out to her. Again, she is responsive and she is ready to be that space for you to fill the gap for support. So as I always say, we are here to help you feel seen, feel heard, and feel supported. So please take advantage of all of our resources, all of our guests who have been on the podcast from season 1 to now season 4. They are here for you guys. But for me, look me up. Fertility Ain't Fair on everything from IG to the website to our YouTube page. Also here to be a resource to just, chat, vent, whatever you need or point you in the right direction. And until our next episode, as I always say, I am your forever friend in fertility. Stay hopeful.